We got a unique Mission 43 podcast today. We're talking about HBOT, hyperbaric oxygen therapy. We're sitting down with Doc Steve Wyman and Davin Strang from Summit Hyperbarics and Wellness, our newest partner that's on the Idaho Outdoor Fieldhouse campus. We're going to dive right in to learn about the physiology of hyperbarics and learn more about what Summit is and who they serve. Welcome to the Mission 43 podcast, a podcast dedicated to discussing the struggles and triumphs of transitioning to life after the military. I'm Dan Nelson. I'm a former Army Special Forces officer who's personally experienced the challenges of transitioning to civilian life. In every episode, we'll be sharing tips, strategies, and real-life stories of veterans and their families who've chosen Idaho for their life after the military. So join us, and let's start the conversation. All right, Davin, Doc Steve Wyman, thanks so much for being here, guys.
Glad to be here.
Glad to be here.
A chunk of the Summit team, even though this is not representative of the entire Summit Hyperbarics and Wellness team. Truly appreciate you guys taking the time to be here today. And just to start off, because I think we have a lot of people that are watching, listening, whatever, what is HBOT?
What is HBOT? Great question. So hyperbaric oxygen therapy is where a person is placed into an increased pressure environment on additional supplemental oxygen. The net effect being that it increases the level of oxygen in all of your tissues.
Yeah. So in laypersons like me, like tone it down, Doc, I guess, like, so it's putting me under pressure with increased oxygen levels going inside my body. And is that through like my mouth and nose, or is it going through my skin, or how does that work?
It's going through your pulmonary system. In other words, you're put into this chamber where we then apply pressure to increase the atmosphere from what we're normally sitting at in a room to maybe 1.5 times what is normal pressure. In addition to that, we're providing you with 100% oxygen while you're in that environment. And the net effect is that this gas goes into your lungs under pressure and then diffuses into your tissue. The net effect being that you've now raised the oxygen tension, or the amount of oxygen in that tissue, by a certain percentage.
And what does an increased level of oxygen in one's tissue actually do for a body?
So that's a great question, very interesting question. What we're learning and what we found is that when the human body or a cell in your body is exposed to increased oxygen for a specified period of time, it ends up stimulating that particular cell or that organ to increase vascularity. In other words, it stimulates the production of new blood vessels. In certain neurologic tissues, it can stimulate the production of stem cells to then become differentiated into new nerve cells. Those are the major effects. It will stimulate various growth factors, like I said, which leads to the production of these, this increased vascularity and tissue development.
Well, it sounds like too good to be true, right? So all the three of us sitting here, like, we're huge proponents of HBOT. For the people that are out there, like, I went through HBOT and it was a game changer for me after pretty significant TBI and other injuries. And it made a huge level of difference. And since then, we, like Mission 43 and the Albertsons Family Foundation, have invested pretty heavily in HBOT because we're true believers in its efficacy in helping people heal. And it's not necessarily a silver bullet for anything, right? Like, that wasn't the one thing that I did. But for me, a couple things I noticed in the chamber, right? And I'm going to ask you guys to describe like what a typical person's experience is. But one of the things is, if you have a cut on, like I had a cut on my arm, a scrape. It wasn't like a sci-fi movie or anything, but when I was sitting in the chamber breathing oxygen, I could notice that like the tissue around that cut would get super pink, like noticeably pink, whereas then afterwards, then it starts to go back to normal after I got out. Like, why does it do that?
So if you look at the on-label utilization of hyperbaric medicine, which has been used for years, one of the one of the conditions that we typically treat are non-healing wounds. And, the question is, how does hyperbaric medicine work and allow that to take place? And by, once, for example, in a diabetic who's got a poor healing wound, they have poor blood flow to that particular area of the tissue. By putting them in that oxygen-rich environment and stimulating that healing and recovery, you can think of I'm thinking in terms of a head injury, for example. And I'm kind of jumping ahead here a little bit, but
That's okay.
The process of wound healing under the on-label use of hyperbarics is probably very similar to the way it seems to help in traumatic brain injuries. In other words, you've got this wound that just isn't completely healing from, say, repeated concussions, some sort of head trauma. And by getting that oxygen-rich environment, you've now increased the production of these growth factors, this vascularity to that area of the tissue that was struggling before. And in the process, the healing process takes place. Whereas in a normal, non-hyperbaric environment, there just isn't enough oxygen there for that to occur, for that healing to take place.
Well, so like I said, all true believers in HBOT here. But I'm curious, what is the background that you guys have that make you passionate about doing this for the demographics of Mission 43, the Challenge Athletes Foundation, first responders, and the groups that you're going to serve? Where'd you guys come from?
I think, I was a salvage diver for 24 years in the U.S. Navy, and as a diver, we use hyperbarics for decompression, and you're exposed to that, and you recognize very, very quickly how much it helps and how much the increased partial pressure of oxygen, increased oxygen in your tissues allow you to reduce the amount of time necessary to decompress. When you consider what the metabolic processes actually are and what's going on in your body and recognize that something takes a very long time at 21% oxygen, which is what we have in air.
Right.
And if you can breathe 100%, that's 100%. And if you can breathe 100% at 1.5 or 2 atmospheres, then functionally it's as though you're breathing 150 or 200%. The increased oxygen, as your average enlisted knuckle dragger, we used to say just green gas is good gas because the O2 bottles are green. And then you started looking as you decompressed quickly and had no adverse effects, or as you said, there was a time I'd fallen off of a motorcycle, and had severe road rash, but was scheduled to do dives. And you could feel it. You could feel it tingling. You could feel it pinking up. And then as someone who fell down a lot as a kid, I knew how long a road rash was going to take to heal, and it was healing in 1/3 or less the time. It was fantastic. And then you extrapolate out and see what you're seeing in the real world. I started to recognize watching Sunday football games, and the guy would get a pick six and run 100 yards and then jump on oxygen.
Right.
Oh, geez, that's what we do. And every time you get in an ambulance, you get on oxygen. Oh, that's awesome. And then EPO and everything about the Tour de France and Lance Armstrong, it becomes very, very obvious that your system works a ton better doing what it normally does if we can increase your on-gassing or the oxygen perfusion in your tissues.
So what you're promising the members of Mission 43 is to make us all Lance Armstrongs.
I don't know if that's the one you want to be, but
either way.
you're definitely going to perform better, and you're going to heal better, and your recovery is going to be more effective and more efficient. Everything from the non-healing wounds that Doc was talking about to some of the unseen injuries, which is what we're trying to focus on at Summit.
Gotcha.
And the
Doc,
neurocognitive ability as well.
Well, we'll get there. But Doc, you were in the Army, right?
I was. So I went through medical school on a military scholarship. Ended up doing my residency in the military in emergency medicine, and that's what I've been doing for the last 28 years. My experience with hyperbarics in that environment was for carbon monoxide poisoning, decompression sickness from somebody who may have come back from a diving excursion and were having issues with decompression.
And that's what you're calling on label.
Correct.
So for everyone to say on label, that basically means what traditional medical facilities use HBOT for, right?
Right. I mean, that was my exposure and experience. And medical school was very limited exposure. As an emergency physician, we see a lot of wounds, do a lot of wound care. We refer a lot of people to our wound care clinics for hyperbaric treatment as part of their healing process. It wasn't until I started actually reading the literature and the research about these off-label utilizations, in particular for traumatic brain injury and PTSD, and learned that there's a huge fund of knowledge out there coming out that's saying that this really improves people's lives. And as I began to look into it, I could start to see the correlation between just a normal wound healing and what it was doing to a person's brain who'd suffered some sort of traumatic injury in the past.
Well, I was curious about that because we're talking about like road rash and a cut on my arm and all that stuff. What's the difference just in general? Like if that super oxygenation through the process of pressure, time, and oxygen helps tissue on my arm, why doesn't it help tissue in my brain?
Well, it does.
It does. Okay.
That's the idea. The problem that people sometimes have in the medical community is that we're sort of taught that the neurologic system, the brain, is sort of a stagnant organ in the sense that it cannot regenerate or repair itself. Once the damage is done, it's permanent. And we're learning that that's not the case. That actually there is some plasticity, neuroplasticity in the brain that allows it to begin rewiring and rehabilitating itself in the right circumstances.
If that's what doctors are taught, then how do they explain people that come back from TBIs?
Well, that's what I've learned is that there's more to it than what we had an idea on, and it's sometimes very difficult to change somebody's mind in this field after they've been practicing in one particular way all their lives, and all of a sudden this new idea or concept comes out. It's not always readily accepted. It takes time for the community to understand, hey, maybe there is something here.
So you're telling me that the medical industrial complex of America is set in its ways?
Well, they're set in their ways, and like any other sort of cutting edge endeavor, I like to analogize the Wright brothers in flight. There were a lot of folks that flew before the Wright brothers, just not too many that landed. And along those lines, there's a perception that hyperbarics is a little bit of a Wild West, and it has been unregulated. And as we come in, individuals that aren't necessarily as versed or haven't had the experience in hyperbaric medicine look back at some of these pioneers. We've all seen pioneers with the Titan submersible recently. Sometimes they're a little shady, and there have been accidents in hyperbarics. So you look at the way we conduct hyperbaric medicine right now, the way I conducted it for nearly 3 decades in the Navy, and the way it's going to be accomplished at Summit Hyperbarics and Wellness. The safeties implemented are outstanding, and we've become a place where hyperbarics is a very, very safe, very, very controlled therapy. Whereas folks coming outside, they start doing research and they start looking at the origins of hyperbarics or hyperbarics in the 1950s. Gases under pressure in a confined environment can be problematic if they're not run by highly qualified people and properly
maintained equipment. I'm sure the quality of equipment matters a lot. And I think you touched on like the Wild West of the HBOT industry, I'd say, in this country at least, because I know other countries are on different levels.
Well, I wanted to add, there's a lot of stakeholders out there who, have built, careers and organizations on treating, brain injuries in a certain way. Pharmacology, for example. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry has a large stake in treating a lot of these conditions that may result from brain injuries, depression and anxiety, these sorts of things. And so there's going to be some resistance met there. That's not to say that those organizations, those people don't have something to contribute, but just to say that it's already been decided, this is how it's going to be, or this is what we need to do, I think is the wrong attitude. I mean, we need to be open-minded and look at these new concepts that are coming forward, especially with the quality of the research that's coming out.
Right. So in that, you're politely walking around it, but there's these groups out there that they have either outright refused to try HBOT for TBI and PTSD related symptoms for veterans in particular. I'll speak for myself, like the DOD and VA, it's not a thing. Is that ever going to change, or do you think
the paradigm shift in those large government organizations is difficult? That being said,
understatement.
I think that with time, I think we will begin to chisel away at that rock and eventually get some acceptance on the government side.
Where in the world are they doing this, like, successfully with regulation? I hate to say that, but you know what I mean? Like, where is it commonly accepted practice? Who does it? Who does HBOT to treat TBI and PTSD related symptoms?
I would start
Israel.
with, the Israelis are doing a huge amount of research in this area. I think they're the leaders in the utilization and the research that's coming out. They're not alone, but they've been doing this for quite some time with their population and had amazing results with this.
And they have a really small military population in Israel, right? That was a joke.
Everybody's in the military in Israel.
Right.
There are a number of things going on in the United States, and I alluded to it a little bit before with a little bit of the Wild West, a little bit of people operating what they put out as proper hyperbarics in an improper manner or an accident that occurred, or some of these other countries that are utilizing stem cells in conjunction with HBO. And we've got a good deal of negative press on stem cells in the United States, and we've got a good ways to go with that. But these countries are having amazing results. I think one of the things Doc and I were able to tour India, where our chamber is being constructed, and see some of the clinics that they have running. And I was absolutely stunned. Went to a clinic that's focusing on higher brain function therapies, and they had an active physician who was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease in 2003. If anybody knows anything about ALS, you're not supposed to last that long. I believe she was given a prognosis of 2009, and with a combination of therapies, including this and stem cell, she's not only still with us, but she's still a practicing physician.
I have those stories too. I mean, everyone that's been around HBOT, especially off-label HBOT, has those stories that shouldn't be true.
Sure.
It almost, like, the success of hyperbaric oxygen therapy sometimes hurts it, because people hear those stories and they're like, okay, too good to be true. And I think of Alan, who went through HBOT at Idaho Hyperbarics and Pocatello with me, and he had Parkinson's for decades. And you could barely notice. And apparently, I never knew him before, but it was ending his life.
Right.
And turned it around.
And that's part of our difficulty here. And Doc alluded to that just now, that if you're a practicing physician at the front end of your field, and you know that what you do is very, very good, and everything about what you've done for your patients for decades is to the best of your ability, it's very, very difficult to come, especially towards the end of your career. Say you're 60 years old. Not that 60 years old is the end of your career, Doc.
Spring chicken.
I hope not. It's very, very difficult to get someone to buy into the fact that they have discounted hyperbarics for their entire career for any number of good reasons, only to find out that they would have been able to care for, save, improve the life, the standard of living of all of their patients.
That is an interesting perspective. It makes it very personal for those that are struggling with this transition, or I wouldn't even say exploratory, because of my experience and other experiences of people close to me through this. But I know medically, I guess, or research-wise, with it is exploratory or off-label, or what's the proper term?
Yeah, I mean, in the realm that we're going to be utilizing hyperbaric medicine or hyperbaric therapy is what's considered, quote, off-label, meaning that it has not technically been approved by the FDA. That doesn't mean you can't utilize it, doesn't mean it's not safe. It just means that the FDA has not given it the official stamp of approval for treating that specific condition. Now, every condition at some time or another, either gets accepted or rejected. It's not it's neither of those at this point. Those off-label applications, for example, on-label would be, like we said, wound care, decompression sickness. It's a proven, well-established in the literature that it's useful in those circumstances. For what we're going to be using it for, it's not quite there yet. But as that research continues and becomes available, I would anticipate that this will eventually become an on-label accepted form of treatment.
Well, I hope it does, and I know we're all super hopeful for that. But what is different, again, about talk about the lack of standardization with HBO, HBOT, and all means hyperbaric oxygen treatment or therapy. What's the difference between the place, I don't know, down the street here in Boise, Idaho, it's a wellness clinic in the shopping center a couple blocks from here that's offering people HBOT for $200 a pop. It's a small facility. I've looked at their chambers. It doesn't look like any chamber I've ever been in, because the chambers I've been in look like giant submarines or tanks, where people can be seated and walk around in. I guess, what's the difference between your guys' equipment at Summit?
It's probably worthwhile, first of all, just to explain the different types of chambers that are out there. The most common one that people might see are the single-place chambers, where you go in as a single person. There's no attendant with you. You're put under pressure, put on 100% oxygen. Commonly what we see around here, most of the chambers around here are probably single-place chambers in the wound care centers, things of those sort. The other common one you might hear about are the bag chambers. These are the inflatable chambers that maybe raise at the most the pressure inside them from 1 to 1.3 atmospheres.
And we're sitting at 1 right now.
Correct.
What we live at is 1 atmosphere of pressure?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there may or may not be supplemental oxygen pumped in with that. There's some risk and danger associated with that. They're not regulated. They weren't designed for putting on 100% oxygen. Those chambers were actually built specifically to take people in high-altitude environments and put them back under pressure while they attempted to get them off the mountain.
Yeah, those inflatables, they are made to save people's lives on Everest that are
so they have a purpose,
right.
But for what we're utilizing, what we're wanting to do with it, it really isn't an application there. The other key factor, I think, that needs to be considered is who is operating the chambers,
right,
and who's sort of overseeing the medical component of that. And there's not a lot of regulation there. We are, we have highly trained chamber operators with years of military experience who are going to be operating our facility, and there's going to be a physician there all the time whenever we've got patients in a chamber diving.
So you're an actual medical doctor.
Correct.
And Davin, you are also a doctor, correct?
Sort of, no.
Not even close.
I'm a chief warrant officer, which is one step above doctor. Retired.
Right, retired. That makes it even higher.
Sure.
You become the 5-star at that point.
Oh, good Lord.
So how many years of experience in hyperbarics do you have?
I qualified to operate a chamber in 1992, the first time. So quite a bit of experience across the board. One of the amazing things is towards the end of my career, I worked at a dive locker in San Diego called Southwest Regional Maintenance Center, and we rotated as the regional recompression chamber, response chamber with the civilian hospitals. So a huge amount of exposure to just about everything that was on label, carbon monoxide, decompression sickness for sure, but also with the support of, they call them diving medical officers or undersea medical officers in the Navy, that were willing to reach out and explore some of the other applications of hyperbarics. We were able, with availability, to support civilian dependents who had anything from they were being treated for cancer, and we found that the hyperbaric treatments would allow them to recover more quickly and be able to deal with cancer treatments better, to osteomyelitis and non-healing wounds. We had a military spouse who was having difficulty with a C-section that was not healing. It was an emergent C-section, very traumatic situation. Twins, one of the children didn't survive. Oh. And the military was referring her to psych, that her wound was giving her so much trouble that, and the traditional medicines, the traditional antibiotics were not working, that they began to accuse her of contaminating her wound site.
Oh, God.
So this is a young mother of multiple children who had just lost one of her twins during childbirth, and traditional Western medicine was going to send her to have her committed in a psychiatric facility. We did 2 rounds of 40 dives with her, and she played soccer that fall. This is an exposure to what was more on label with regard to wound care, but consistently throughout my career, every time during a decompression situation where someone has an arterial gas embolism or DCS, and someone presents to me, and for layman's terms, for someone with a diving injury,
Yeah.
they come into our chamber facility functionally as someone who has just had a massive stroke. All symptoms are very, very in line. They can't walk. Their gait is completely messed up. They've potentially lost some part of their vision or their hearing. They can't speak. And you put them in a chamber and put them at pressure, and 10 minutes later, they're normal.
Yeah.
Everything is functioning. And, of course, the treatment protocols have you at depth for a great period of time. Basically, your bubbles that have expanded during decompression in the water need to be compressed and reabsorbed into your tissues. And then you offer the additional time when we talk about these treatment tables that are 6, 9, 14 hours long. The point is we initially address the injury, and then you spend that period of time during the treatment table protocol administering increased oxygen to the wound to promote healing. And you offer an extremely long period of time. You're injured because you came up and decompressed too fast.
Yep.
So we're going to go really, really slow on this decompression to make absolutely sure there's not a reincidence of the injury, because you are predisposed a little bit. You've been injured, so we need to give you some time to heal. Watching those things happen just hammered home not only how beneficial oxygen was, but consistently throughout my career, something else would come up. And you're like, wow, it works for that too. Holy smokes, it works for that too.
Yeah.
And then you just come back to the very simple fact of people say you burn calories when you're just walking. You exercise and everything's about burning calories. And
I sweat when I eat, yeah.
It really is almost parallel to the fire triangle. And if anyone's ever tried to make a fire or worked with oxyacetylene torch, and you realize how much more efficient and how much better it burns when you add oxygen. When you get educated, when you learn, when you have more experience, you realize there's too much of a good thing, and we have to be very, very careful about how it's applied. But functionally, especially when you consider things that we talk about like post-traumatic stress disorder, I always like, it's not like an injury disorder. Your broken arm is not a broken arm disorder. It's an injury. And I am unaware at this point of any injury that we cannot improve the response and healing with increased partial pressure of oxygen, outside of potentially some injuries where some bacterial infection or something like that, which obviously doc pre-screens where the oxygen may.
So we're talking about, like, your facility is going to be on, the Idaho Outdoor Fieldhouse campus. So this 7-acre campus that hasn't even opened at the time that we're talking right now. Mm-hmm. And you guys will start treating people at Summit in 2024. And so the people listening, it was my understanding that you guys are going to be treating people that are eligible and medically qualified, obviously screened by you, Doc, from the Mission 43 population, military veterans and military spouses, first responders, and the Challenge Athlete Foundation, adaptive athletes, right? Mm-hmm. In that, like, what is their experience going to be? Because I'm sure we have some people that are listening that have military dive experience.
Sure.
I wouldn't say it's unpleasant, but it's not the same as diving in the civilian world. You're not holding up your hand the entire time and then going from 0 to 2 or 1 to 3 atmospheres at a time. Yeah. So what do you think the experience is going to be like at Summit for those people?
As compared to what they might have seen in one of the smaller facilities that you talk about here
The civilian
locally,
ones?
the civilian ones, or if they've been in the military, it's going to be night and day. The chambers that we're having manufactured by Techna out of India is a modular chamber. I wish I could show the picture right now. The chambers were very narrow little alcoves where you sit in a chair, much like this, maybe a little bit more comfortable than this, but it was an individual chair and more comfortable than anything we'd experienced in the military for sure. But they've remanufactured to meet America with Disabilities Act requirements so that our chamber is going to be flush with the floor. The door is not like a port clang as though you're getting in a submarine or something. It's much more like Star Trek. The doors slide sideways. You roll directly in. And everything is sized for comfort, to the ability to wheel a gurney in straight off of an ambulance if necessary, although that won't be our focus. I'm a little bit sad to say they had me sit in the seats that were manufactured specifically for us, and it was a comfortable seat, and they took me out of that, and then they seated two Indian gentlemen right next to each other in the same seat that I had just taken up.
Well, they're built for men of our carriage.
They didn't look like small people to me, but potentially side by side.
So this is something that doesn't really exist right now in our country, right? Like at this level, like the Summit facility and the equipment, the chambers that you're actually going to have in there. Is there anything like it?
Absolutely not. The closest is some of the military facilities with very large multi-place chambers. And they're nice, and they're state-of-the-art, cutting edge. I wouldn't throw shade on any of my friends at the Naval Experimental Diving Unit or anything like this. But our chamber's got a lounge chair, and it reclines, and you'll be comfortable, and you'll enjoy the time that you spend in the chamber. I think secondarily to that, barotrauma or pressure-related incident issues that folks have when they drive through the mountains or ride on a smaller aircraft, our travel rates are unbelievably gradual, and it's particularly to ensure that people almost don't recognize the fact that they're going under pressure.
Well, that's a good point. So like people are probably wondering, like, what does it feel like? We get that all the time. Like, what does it feel like when you're actually sitting in the chamber to go through HBOT? And I think all of us have been in it, but how would you describe that experience, Doc?
Well, for myself, who's had very little experience, the first time in was I was concerned because I had a lot of middle ear problems when I was a child. I'd had a ruptured tympanic membrane that didn't heal. I just had a lot of ear problems as a result of a diving-related injury in a swimming pool. And I found that I was able to equilibrate my sinuses, my ears very easily. We went down at a very gradual pace and returned the same way. I didn't experience any difficulties whatsoever. I mean, it was a...
So you say go down. I know we talked about dives and everything, but the chambers are actually static, right?
Correct.
That's right.
And so you walk into this chamber that's going to be at Summit, or one of the chambers that's going to be at Summit. You sit in your ridiculously monstrous lounge chair, and then the descent is actually the pressurization of that chamber, which
Correct.
is a hard chamber. And can people feel it? Like, do you feel like you're being pushed against something, or what's that pressurization like?
We say going down, or we call it a dive, because we're equating the pressure that we put you under in the chamber to the same pressure in the water.
Right.
So typically in the Navy, we would talk about how many feet we were pressing you to. Civilian side, we generally talk about atmospheres and do 1.3 or 1.5, 2.0 atmospheres, an atmosphere being 14.7 pounds per square inch. So anyone who's dealt with a compressor that they've got in their backyard at 150 or some such like that, and you blow the air on it, you can sort of equate that the maximum in the range that we're looking at right now would be an additional 14.7 pounds per square inch, or a 2.0 atmosphere. There are therapies, 2.5 or 3.0,
Sure.
but in general, we're finding that those are not the additional therapeutic benefit, if there is is not worth the additional time or pressurization or potential barotrauma risk to patients.
So you can go down, like you can go down to from where we're sitting at right now, pressure-wise, which is 1 atmosphere, down to 2 atmospheres pretty quick. But it might not be comfortable if you do it super quick. And you guys are not in the business.
Physiologically, the only part that really is an issue is where you have air inside of a confined space, so a sinus in your face.
Or where a brain is supposed to be in some cases.
Yeah.
Right.
Usually there's fluid around that, though.
Okay.
So the fluid's not compressible. It's wherever there's gas collecting in a confined space. So technically it could be inside your intestine, could be in your lungs. For example, if you held your breath as you were going down, you could feel your chest compressing. But if you're breathing the air as you're moving, it has no effect. It's really going to be those sinuses. Maybe if you're just really gassy, it'll actually get better as you go down, may return as you're coming back up because that gas now is re-expanding inside the intestine. But for the most part, it's going to be very little effect.
So that experience, you're just sitting there breathing, and you're going down as if you were slowly sinking into the ocean, I guess, right? With water around you.
I think similarly as if you've been in the mountains around here in Idaho, we're kind of a high desert place, very, very little humidity. And then maybe you go to the southeast and you're someplace that's very, very humid.
Yeah.
And people will describe that the air is thick. As we pressurize from 1 to 2 atmospheres, functionally what we're doing is mashing double the number of molecules per volume. And that sort of feeling of the air being a little bit thicker. Obviously, humidity, it's water, it's more volume and dense, so you feel it more to a greater extreme. But really, yeah, we're putting more atmospheres in, or atoms in the atmosphere,
So
and it feels more
at depth at 2 atmospheres of pressure. What is the equivalent of, like, how deep in the ocean am I at that point underwater?
So you're at about 33 feet. Yeah.
About 33 feet. And then what? What do I do when I'm in your guys' chambers?
relax.
Yep.
Watch a movie. We have pressurized boxes that isolate iPads or tablets to surface pressure. They're not part of the chamber environment, but they're visual. You can see them right there through a screen. So you watch a movie, enjoy, listen to a podcast, take a nap, meditate.
But that point too, like during the pressurization, we're not pressurizing these chambers with 100% O2, or 100% oxygen.
Right. So in these multi-place chambers, you go in, the chamber is filled with atmospheric air, 21% oxygen. You're compressed with atmospheric air, but when you wear a hood or a mask that's delivering the oxygen, you're getting that oxygen at that increased pressure, that pure oxygen at increased pressure, just through the pulmonary tract, through your lungs, which then dissipates into the bodies or diffuses into the body. But the chamber itself is not filled with pure oxygen.
Right.
So that greatly mitigates the risk for fire and those related issues like you might have in a single place fully oxygenated chamber.
The only place there's 100% O2 is right in someone's basically face and nose and mouth.
Yep.
And so then how long does this whole process take? Like if I'm going in for a dive,
so a standard dive would typically take about 90 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes to get down to the depth that we're going to put you at. You'll spend an hour there. You'll be on your mask. At some point, about halfway through, we may take you off oxygen and just have you breathe room air. It's called an air brake. Probably wouldn't even notice the difference because there's no way to detect pure oxygen from atmospheric air. And then you'll come back up over a 10 to 15 minute period, and roughly works out to about 90 minutes a dive.
Okay. And what do people feel like I guess I can't say that. What have you guys felt? And then I know what I felt after a dive. Is there anything noticeable right then? Like, oh my God, I can see again type moments?
With most of the things that we're going to be treating are long-term. The I can see again, I can feel again are the more traumatic, immediate, recent injuries of decompression sickness, things that people have been dealing with for an extended period of time, which most of our veterans, it takes them a while to get to HBOT. They're going to see more, they're going to see subtle improvements. Immediately upon leaving the chamber, you're oxygenated. You're much like Lance Armstrong after taking an EPO hit. So you're going to feel pretty invigorated. But again, as you breathe and you leave the chamber and you're breathing 21% oxygen again, you sort of return to normal. But over time, things improve. And when I say time, depending on the individual, 1 to 10, your initial set of dives, your sleep improves.
Yeah.
Your cognitive function improves. You recognize that you don't walk around the island in the kitchen wondering why you came to the kitchen quite so much anymore.
And the process isn't immediately healing an injury or a wound or anything of that sort. It basically, once you're exposed to that oxygen and that pressure combined, it's not just the oxygen, it's not just the pressure, it's the two together. That's what's triggering the process within your tissues to start making the changes that will result in improvement, and that's going to show itself over time.
It's pressure, oxygen, and time. Like it seems too simple to be as effective as it is. Mission 43 has been sending people to hyperbarics since 2019, and it's something that we really believe in. And one of the things that we hear the most, like from most of our veterans that we've sent there so far and first responders, one, increase in like better mood, just in general. My wife would say I'm more patient, which is impossible, I think. And then the second one that we hear all the time is like, man, I slept a lot better. Like right off the jump, it's not like everything is healed, but it improves sleep. And I don't know, like, is the body actually under stress during this as I'm sitting in my lounge chair, breathing 100% O2 at 2 atmospheres of pressure?
Well, it's kind of interesting because you think, well, if a little bit of hyperbarics helps, why not put them in hyperbarics all the time?
Yeah.
And what we've found is that it's actually the cycling of hyperbarics that seems to trigger all of these recovery responses of tissues. So it's not just being in oxygen under pressure. It's that exposure to oxygen pressure and then taking it away, putting it back, taking it away, that seems to really trigger the repair process that goes on in tissues.
So if I'm a person that's eligible for the Fieldhouse, Idaho Outdoor Fieldhouse, I'm a CAF athlete, I'm a military veteran that's really struggling with TBI, PTSD related symptoms, something like that. How do I get to Summit? Like, how do I actually get in your guys' chambers? What process does that look like? And how long is it going to take me? How many dives am I going to do?
So I think in most cases they're going to come through Mission 43. And you folks are then going to come to us and say, hey, I think we've got somebody who might benefit from this. We will have an entire staff ready to start the evaluation process. We do a psychosocial assessment. On my part, it's going to be a full medical assessment. And then we will sit down as a team and discuss each individual about what benefit we can or can't offer them, and then lay out a plan of treatment. So it will include hyperbaric treatment. It may include some physical therapy. It may include, assessing nutritional issues, those sorts of things. All that sort of as a package together in the process of your treatment.
So it sounds pretty thorough, I guess.
It's thorough, and I want to add in here because it's critical for vets. Just ask. There's not one way. There's a contact link on the Mission 43 website. There's a contact link on the Summit Hyperbarics and Wellness website. I apologize right now. I hope our website is up and running. We're a landing page right now by the time this podcast comes out, but the contact is there. Anyone who reaches out and emails, comes to a Mission 43 event and says, hey, I think I might benefit. Can you help me? We will get you to the right people. We will get you evaluated. And if hyperbarics is not appropriate, we will refer you to folks that can help you. There's not you got to do it this way. Contact anybody for a CAF athlete. All the folks at CAF, they will refer you through, and we'll get you taken care of.
And as we go through this, and our teams move onto the Fieldhouse campus, Brad Blair from Mission 43 is going to be basically the liaison between all the groups that use and all the people that use the Fieldhouse and all the people that go to Summit. So if you're interested in contacting him, or if you're interested in learning more about HBOT, contact brad.blair@mission43.org, and he will get you linked up with the right people and start this evaluation process. Or just look up the Mission 43 website or the Summit Hyperbarics and Wellness website. And it's not just HBOT. That's what you guys are saying. Like,
Absolutely.
that is the center of gravity of our operation there.
Correct.
Obviously, because that's what we truly believe in and invest in, and to help with all kinds of issues. But for the people that go through the assessment, get qualified medically, psychosocially, all those different things. By the way, are you going to ask us to get naked and duck walk? Davin will, but the doctor won't. Okay, perfect. Just so everyone knows that there's level set expectations. Well, how much is it going to cost the people that are going in there?
It's not going to cost anything.
This is the moment where we reach out and throw huge credit and thanks to the J&K Albertson Foundation. The Summit Hyperbarics and Wellness, along with the Fieldhouse, has been funded by the foundation purely to help challenged athletes, veterans, first responders in the state of Idaho, and we can't thank them enough.
Well, it's a huge investment. I really think that, as we're sitting here right now in Boise, Idaho, it's going to fundamentally change the landscape, not just for this community, for the state of Idaho regionally and nationally. Honestly, I think that once, like you were saying, Doc, earlier, once people catch on to the efficacy of HBOT, which they're already starting to, increasingly in this country, I think it's going to blow up, and you guys are going to have your hands full. What do you think the capacity is? Like, how many people can we actually treat at Summit?
Well, the benefit of the vision of the Albertson Foundation is we've built a facility that is outstanding, state-of-the-art, very large, and the building and chamber is designed for expansion.
Like me.
The chairs are big. Currently at full expansion, if we grow to what we're currently built for, will be 32 patients per dive at 90 minutes per. Realistically, reasonably within a normal 9 to 5, we could do 4 dives a day. So if somebody wants to help me with the math, somewhere in the neighborhood of 128 people a day, that's huge. Our expectation is to crawl, walk, run. We want absolutely everyone that comes through this facility to get state-of-the-art treatment from jump, and obviously for staff and all of our interclinic functionalities as far as onboarding and patient care and running people through, make sure we're getting everyone the care that they need at the level that they need it. We're not at 128 people a day.
Yeah.
But if we're doing 2 chambers, 4 dives each a day at 16 people per chamber, that's our number.
One of the things that I think is super cool about you guys personally, everyone on the Summit team and Mission 43 and CAF team, is we recognize that, recovery is not an individual sport. It involves everyone around the person that is recovering, and it's usually not linear, right? If I'm drinking too much, I get drunk and I fall and I hit my head and it causes a brain bleed, which leads me to HBOT to fix that physical instance. There's probably more there than just HBOT that can be helped, right? Why am I drinking so much? Why?
These are all the kinds of things that we will be, working to address.
Right. I think like the answer of just ask, like get connected with Mission 43, the Challenge Athletes Foundation of Idaho, get connected to Summit, and just start asking the questions that maybe this podcast has sparked.
Let us help you find what it is that you really need.
Well, I truly appreciate everything you guys have done so far to get HBOT and Summit Hyperbarics and Wellness to where it's at right now. And I just truly thank you guys for what you've done for our country, and then what you're going to continue to do for our veterans, first responders, and adaptive athletes in the community and the country.
Thanks
for
Dan.
being here,
We're
guys.
looking forward to it.
Thanks. Thanks for joining us for the Mission 43 podcast. We hope you found it informative and helpful. If you have any questions or feedback, please comment below or email podcast@mission43.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast to stay up to date with new episodes. Be proud of your service, not defined by it. See you next time.